This first video is going to focus on knowing how. That is, how does a text do what it does? In order for students to take anything from a text, they first need to know how a text works. So you can model for your students how a text works by making a brief video like this one of what happens in a text. You're focusing here on describing. So I'm going to use for each of these illustrations, as I mentioned, a chapter from Bransford et al.'s How People Learn called How Experts Differ from Novices. And in this video, you can see that I've annotated the text to show things that are important for showing how the text works. So in this bubble, and these bubbles are also listed in the side margin, I've said, oh, right here, this is the introduction to the chapter. It situates it within the broader context of the book. And I know this because it says, this chapter illustrates key scientific findings that have come from the study of people who have developed expertise. That tells me it's important. Here, in the second bubble, it introduces what's happening in the chapter. Next, I scroll down, and you can see that I've bubbled here, I've pointed out, there's a numerical list. If there's a numerical list, it's likely that it's going to be important findings, and I can tell that because it says, we consider several key principles of experts' knowledge. Well, that tells me this is what's going to be considered in the chapter. Very important for you, that is you, pretending you are my students, to pay attention to that as well. Now, I move down into the text, and I'm only doing a few pages of each of these texts for you, the same pages. And you can see that I've noted, several things here. In this first bubble, description of the study. It's one of the earliest. Well, that suggests to me that this is going to be a chronological explanation of different studies of novice expert practices. Something for me to pay attention to. Is that important? I don't know yet. A second thing I notice here is the way that the citations are incorporated. I see here that they use author date citation style. Well, if I'm teaching students something where they're going to need to cite sources or incorporate evidence, I'm going to really want them to pay attention when they look at how a text works, how those citations are incorporated. And this next bubble has to do with that too. I'm pointing out, well, look, there's a big summary of the DeGroote study. There aren't very many quotations, direct quotations from the study. Instead, it's a big summary in the words of the authors, not a lot of block quote until down here. And then we get a small block quote, relatively speaking. So then one more feature I want to pay attention to as we think about how the text is working, that is, how does the text do what it does, is this point after the block quote. So above the block quote and then into the block quote, this is all what the studies say. But then at the end of the block quote right here, the authors are pointing out why all of this is important. So there's a sentence connecting the method, what it established in terms of practice, and subsequent studies. That sentence is very important for how the text works. That sentence signals connections between things in the text, and you can help students pay attention to what it looks like, what sentences like that look like, what kinds of words are included, how they function to connect one idea to the next. So here, for instance, you can say, it provided for a very careful analysis of the conditions of specialized learning. It's signaling what's important. Okay, now as I keep going through how, I scroll down and you can see that I haven't paid a lot of attention to this part because that's a lot of subsequent studies. And you could point out that in this text, which is a research synthesis, it's going to be lots of subsequent studies that make the same kinds of points. Then it's got some diagrams, and they're all labeled, so I better pay attention to that. That's how a text functions. And then as we get to the end of the section, we can see that there's a summary. The idea that experts recognize features and patterns that are not noticed by novices is potentially important for improving instruction. So again, at the end of each section of the text, there's a synthesis. And so if we're asking students and showing students how to pay attention to how a text works, we need to show them what that looks like.